Hi everyone, welcome to Horticulture and Homes. I'm getting ready to make some pork breakfast sausage. And I'm going to use my KitchenAid mixer because I have the grinding attachment. I like to use this a lot. I also have a cast iron and cast aluminum hand grinder, but I like this better. So typically I will grind my meat with my KitchenAid attachment. So this hopper is something you use if you're juicing something or you need to use a strainer attachment. This is the same piece that you use for that. But we use a different interior part here for the grinding process. The end of this is fitted so that there's a square and a round section. So we just match our shapes up. So we put our cutting blade on there. And then there are two different dies. So depending on what you want your texture of your sausage to be, or you could always cut with the large die and then go through a second process and grind it with a smaller die. Now for my sausage, I have a little bit of pork loin in here, a few pieces, but most of this is pork butt. When you make your sausage, you want at least a 20% fat, so you need enough moisture in the meat. And this is the same piece of meat typically you would use to, if you were smoking meat and doing pulled pork. The pork butt is what really makes good pulled pork. So I've got everything ready to go here. My meat, I cut it up into chunks. And I want this nice and cold, so I don't want the fat to start to melt during the grinding process. You know, sometimes it can get a little soft. So you want everything to be really cold. And I pop this into the freezer for, I don't know, an hour and a half or so. Hour and a half, 2 hours. I don't want the meat to be frozen, but I do want it to be really cold. And since I'll be mixing spices and things into my sausage, and I'm working with a 10-pound batch, I'm going to use this large bowl so I have plenty of room. Now my bone that came out of the pork butt, I have simmered that with some water and bouillon, and that's what I'll use for my broth when I go to can this. The process goes pretty quickly. I love the way this looks. Now I have the smaller KitchenAid mixer, stand mixer, so I probably would not grind more than this 10-pound batch at a time. I'd let my motor cool off in between grinding. But you want to turn your motor up fairly high, or maybe all the way on high, depending on what model you're using. Okay, before I get ready to mix up this batch of sausage, I thought I'd talk about seasonings for just a little bit. You can make a breakfast sausage. You can make any kind of sausage that you can think of. There's lots of recipes on the internet. There are cookbooks devoted to sausage making. It's pretty endless as to what you can do with ground meat and spices. Now, last year, when I was at Penzeys, I think this might have been one of the freebies. It was an Italian sausage seasoning. I can't remember if I bought it or if it was one of the things that I picked up with a coupon. I think it was a coupon, but anyway. So I tried this, and I've used this with ground chicken, and I've done this with pork. This is a really good seasoning. I like it a lot. So this past year when I hit Penzies, I bought a 4-ounce bag of it. Now, in this, the ingredients are salt, fennel seed, telecherry, black pepper, and sugar. That's what's in there in the Penzies mix. You can basically put whatever you want in your sausage. I have a recipe that makes a pretty good chicken sausage. It works good with pork too, though. And I think it's in a safe place at the moment. I know I made some sausage back, I think it was in the early spring. So if I dig that out, I'll post that for you in the information box. But this is a sausage seasoning mix for mild country sausage that I picked up at an Amish grocery store. And this mix has sea salt, unrefined cane sugar, black pepper, less than 2% soybean oil, spices, garlic, ascorbic acid, and natural color. This one I don't like as much as my homemade one, but it's still decent. So if you don't want to mess with blending your mixes, there are plenty of seasoning blends out there. And how I came up with, excuse me, when I first started making sausage years ago, all I did was take my favorite breakfast sausage from the grocery store and I read the label and I started playing around with ingredients. So anytime I'm making sausage or meatballs, I add my seasonings. I like to let the seasonings work through the meat while it's still raw for several hours. So I'll pop this back in the refrigerator and let the flavors kind of move through the meat. And then I will saute off a piece of it, and if it tastes great to me and I'm happy with it, then I can it. If I'm not, then I'll make some changes. Now I'm going to do a little bit different recipe today. So to this 10 pounds of pork, I have a couple ounces of canning salt, and a half cup of brown sugar, now this is a new recipe I'm trying today. I'm going to hold back just a tablespoon or two of that brown sugar, because I like country sausage and it usually isn't quite that sweet. Then I've taken crushed red pepper flakes and I put these in I use a spice grinder or a small coffee grinder, and I pulse this through. I wanted this to be a little bit smaller flake. I didn't want whole seeds and whatnot in there. But you do what you like, however you like your sausage. Now I have some black pepper, that's about a teaspoon, and this is fresh black pepper. Now sage is the big conundrum, the big issue. If you use very much sage in your sausage recipes when you're canning it, now when you're freezing it, it's not a problem, but when you can it, you can get this bitter aftertaste with the sage. So I started thinking about that because most of the time I freeze my sausage, but since I was talking with I'm Still Working, I thought, well, okay, I'll go ahead and get some canned up. So I've decided I'm going to use some fresh sage. And I think that will help counteract some of that bitterness. Most people like a little bit of sage in it when it's canned. And I'm going to try with the fresh. I'm probably going to put somewhere between 2 and 4 tablespoons in this once I get it chopped up, but I need to go do that. I forgot to do my chopping there. The other thing, years ago, before we had freezers, people would can their sausage. My grandparents would make their sausage and can it. And things have changed. When they would do their canning, they would mix up their sausage mix. They would saute it off in a pan just to brown it on each side. You don't have to cook it through. Just to cook it just a little bit so it stays together when it's being canned. And then they would put their patties in their jar and take the hot pork fat and pork grease and pour the fat over the jar. Most of the time when I need to chop up fresh sage, I just do that with a knife. And while I was doing that, I thought about it and I said, wonder how it would work in my spice grinder. It works out pretty well because the more you chop, the darker the color and the more problems you start having. So I'm going to use about 3 tablespoons of chopped fresh sage. And these are my best mixing tools, especially when you're working with larger amounts of meat. And the best sausages and meatloafs are made by, you want to toss your meat to get your spices blended through. But you really don't want the heat of your hands to have any effect on the fat in that meat, and you don't really want to be squishing it up with your hands. Now, I'll need to mix this one more time, but for now, I'm going to pop this in my refrigerator for a little while and come back to it. Alright, I still have some pork left. This is about 4.5 pounds. So I decided I would make up some Italian sausage using the Penzi's mix. And the ratio for this blend, and I wanted to show you that the fennel seeds, they leave those whole. This is a real nice blend. I've made Italian sausage before using other recipes, and it's been really good, and this is really good. So now my spices, I like to keep those vacuum sealed. I have my spices out that I use from day to day, and any extra spice I keep on hand. I try and have it vacuum sealed. And this is a powder, so it's hard to vacuum seal a jar with powder in it if you use the jar lid adapters. But I use one of the canisters, the vacuum sealing canisters, place my jar down in that and seal it that way, and that works really well. So I was a little short, so I'll do a heaping tablespoon. Okay, I was very happy with the seasoning with the sausage. I really like the fact that the fresh sage, it's just so much better. If I were to freeze this meat, I would add more fresh sage, but since I'm canning it, I'm going to hold back on that. But both sausages are quite good. I'm just browning them off on each side. They're still raw in the middle, and then I'll get ready to can them. One of the reasons I like to use cast iron griddle is because since this sausage has the sugar in it, you get all this caramelization. And if I were sauteing this off In a skillet, it would be a bit of a problem to clean the bottom of that skillet partway through a big batch for the canner. But with my, if you have a thin enough spatula, that caramelization comes right up, and I can put that off to the grease trough here on the edge. And then I'm good to continue on with more sausage without having to wash my skillet. As soon as I got done deboning the pork butt, I took those bones and I put them in some water with a few beef bouillon cubes, and I've been had this on for the simmer for several hours. So this is what I'm going to use as my liquid in my jars. So then I took it and I strained it, and I have it ready to go here. I have my jars hot and ready, and my lids and rings are hot. So it's time to get going. I have my damp paper towel to wet my jar rim, and I've added about a tablespoon and a half of vinegar to this damp paper towel. That helps cut the grease so you get a good seal. I got that just a little too full. Now you can flavor, you can put plain water over your sausage, or you can, flavor it however you like. Okay, I think I wound up with 13 pints, I think is what I got there. I would have one more had I not eaten, my husband and I eaten a couple of the patties, so we had a cook's treat. So it's time to put the lid on and can it. Okay, most of you know the drill. My meat is in my pressure canner. Steam is beginning to escape. So I now will set my timer for 10 minutes to let this steam escape. Or all the air is gone out of the canner. And I placed my weight on, and just a few seconds ago, my little vent here, that popped up, so now I'm starting to build pressure. Typically I would have this at 10 pounds of pressure if you're at sea level or below 1,000 feet. I'm right at that borderline, so I'm going to keep mine right at about 11 pounds of pressure. Okay, I've just now come up to pressure. I'm going to keep this here at the 11 pounds or just over, right in there. Okay, so I'm going to make some adjustments. That's still rising a bit. And I'm going to let this go for an hour and 30 minutes. Alright, this is what our sausage looks like after it goes through the pressure canner and the processing. You see there's fat that rises, that comes out of the sausage, and that rises and comes to the top. And then that's in that broth with the patties. The rest of it I've already put away, but at least you get an idea of what it looks like when you're finished. Now, if you use a meat that has less fat in it, you'll obviously have less fat that comes out into your broth. That also will, change your taste, the taste of your sausage. And sausage typically will have about a 20% fat content in it. But that's up to you. That's something you can play around with and decide, how you want to do yours. Okay, one of the things I did want to mention about this sausage is that the patties are very fragile. So you have to be careful when you take them out of the jar, and you need to sear them and get a good crust, a good sear on each side. That will help hold the patty together when you cook it or reheat it. Now, you know, my preference is for fresh sausage or from the freezer, but for a canned meat product, this is okay with me. I don't mind it. My husband's not wild about it, and I think it's because of the texture. The texture is a lot different. It's much softer. You think of things like Spam and things of that nature, what that texture's like. He's not wild about that. But, you know, and by far, a fresh or frozen sausage is my favorite. But I don't mind this for a canned meat product. And a pinch it can come in really handy.